the general word that everybody uses is nasty. I'm in a nasty divorce battle, or I watched a brutal divorce. But nobody tries to change those words, like those outcomes and those outlooks.
Welcome to the Cold Steel Surgical Podcast with your hosts Amir Farouk and Chad Ball. We've had the absolute privilege of chatting with some amazing Canadian as well as international guests over the past year. While the topics have been broad in range, whether clinical, social, or political, our aims for the podcast continue to remain the same. We hope to inspire discussion, creativity, scholarly research, and career development in all Canadian surgeons. We hope you enjoy our second season as we continue to highlight some incredible guests, deliver detailed masterclass sessions on a myriad of clinical topics, and introduce some fresh new features such as debate and companion formats. We hope you relish the podcast as much as we do.
We're thrilled to bring you a very special episode of Cold Steel. We had the pleasure of interviewing Leena Yousefi. Leena has won more awards than we have time to list, but most impressively has been listed as one of Canada's top 25 most influential lawyers, is a Vancouver top 40 under 40 alumni, and is currently the top-rated divorce lawyer in the city of Vancouver by a number of different rating agencies. We have a wide-ranging conversation with Leena about the stresses of divorce, the special issues surrounding separations within the medical and surgical field, and the mechanics of how to get through it all in an intact manner with some level of grace and integrity. We hope you learn as much as we did.
Leena, thank you very much for joining us today on Cold Steel. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast. Could you tell us a little bit about where you grew up and what your training pathway was?
I was born in Iran, and I was a child of war, and my father, who at that time, when I was around 12 years old, was actually reaching the height of his career. But in order to give me and my sister a better life, he applied as an immigrant to come to Canada. And that's where our journey started. I was the rebel and the black sheep in the family, so I didn't follow a very straight path. I didn't know what I wanted to do with life. And I always compared myself to my sister, who's a year older than me, who was always an honor student. And, she always did really well at school and later became a doctor. I was always comparing myself to her, and I just wasn't getting what she was getting. So I kind of went sideways, and at some point I was even expelled from university due to various issues, which I'm not going to bore you with, but one of them was related to depression arising from our immigration to Canada because of the cultural shock and losing the friends and the relatives that, we had. But surprisingly, when I finally woke up and I realized, no, I'm going to do something good with my life, and decided to become a lawyer. My sister was she's a year older than me, so she was always a year ahead of me at school. She was surprisingly, after getting all the marks and all the honor rolls, she surprisingly was not accepted to medical school. And when she asked why, they told her she didn't have enough life experience. So she had to take a year off to do her Doctors Without Borders volunteer work. And during that year, I graduated from university. So in the next year, we both at the same time got into medical school and law school, respectively. So despite taking different paths, we ended up starting our professional schools at the same time, which I thought was really meaningful when you looked at our lives and how different we were. And after law school and getting a job as a family lawyer, I just realized that the family law business and the way that a lot of family lawyers are conducting family law cases, just in my mind, just goes against our nature as human beings. That family law and separations are highly emotional, and they're extremely intricate and sensitive, and to guide people to court and, have them face one another against each other, and sometimes have their children be the referee in the fight, is just so counterproductive to our growth as a society. So I decided to start my own law firm and, treat it as though, when somebody walks through our doors, they're going to the spa. They need to be taken care of and assured, and we need to find the resolution instead of motivating them to engage in a battle or a fight or me versus you. Because to me, family law, even after separation, is really about the best interest of the family as a unit. And that takes compromise on behalf of everybody to make sure that we have the best interest of the family, not just in the individual people who have now separated. So that's how YLaw started, and I'm really pleased to advise that it's been such a successful project, and it's been positive, and we're just very, very thrilled that it became successful, because I had a very drastic view of how it should be done, and it wasn't. I haven't noticed what I've done to have been done in the past, so it was very new, and it was a big risk, but thankfully it created just positivity and growth.
That's an amazing story. It's an incredible story, and we can't think of probably any more life experience that you and your sister had. So that part in particular is kind of unreal, isn't it? It's amazing what these selection committees, what they seem to pick out and pick up sometimes. Yeah. It personally, although certainly we wouldn't have had nearly the life experience that you guys had, it's interesting. Your story takes me back. My brother's also a lawyer in Toronto, and he and I lived together while I was in medicine and he was in law school in Toronto. And it was a special, and it was a very neat time. Mm-hmm. You mentioned so many other things to unpack there. Tell us more about your philosophy and how your particular practice and business is set up. Because, to be honest, Amir is married and has a fantastic family. I'm divorced and I think also have a fantastic family. But in my personal voyage, I never heard at any point anyone talk remotely like you just did. So I'm curious how you manifest that, how that's practical, and what your practice does look like.
It took me a decade to basically get to where I am, because, there's this. As long as us family lawyers look at this as a job and separate ourselves from our clients and think that the resolution to family law is by advocating the rights of an individual, and if those rights are not completely met, we're just going to go and fight it out. As long as we have that attitude, all we're going to do is destroying families. And I mean that even in the cases where we're as successful as it gets, because I've won over 90% of my cases since I started becoming a lawyer. And I can say for all those 90% of the cases, no matter how extreme the win was, such as, cases, for example, for child abduction, where you're reuniting a child with the father, still everybody lost. Because even in that case, when I'm reuniting a child with the father, she's going to be separated from her abducting mother. And regardless of what the mother did, that child deserves both parents. So what really pains me is that family law has become a business where maximizing interests and profits has taken over the reason why we're doing it in the first place. And we've almost become blinded to that aspect of our lives. And, I watched families that I helped and, I was successful in fall apart because of the countless number of days and hours and weeks, having somebody come to my office and write an affidavit against somebody who at one point they loved, and, they joined their beautiful masculine and energy forces, masculine energies to create a child. And now, you're taking that person and saying, I could get you this and it could get you that. And all it takes is, is some sort of a battle where we just have to strategize and we're going to win. Like, it's that concept has become so foreign to me. And my place is to just do my part in showing that we've just gone so off, so wrong by separating ourselves as lawyers from our clients. You know, you just said, you know, you may have perhaps have gone through a divorce. I think everybody in our society has either gone through something like that or heard of something like that. And it's always, you know, the general word that everybody uses is nasty. You know, I'm in a nasty divorce battle, or I watched a brutal divorce. But nobody tries to change those words, like those outcomes and those outlooks. And I blame that on, you know, and this is going to be a bold statement, but I blame that on our lawyers and our legal system for you know, kind of like advocating for that approach. So all it takes is just being empathetic and, you know, putting yourself in that spot and, you know, asking, would I like to be where my client is? If I was my client, is this something I would have done? Knowing that I've seen the ending of a lot of family law cases myself, and I've seen what happens when you engage in a battle. And if the answer is no, then why are you doing it to your own client? That's my philosophy. And I think, you know, there's a lot of compromise in my practice, but at the end of the day, there's long-term benefits and, you know, amicableness and agreements and working with each other, because, you know, we all came together as a community in the best interest of the family, regardless of how much we compromised. And I really hope that the future of family law moves that way. That's definitely something that our justice system, our government, and some lawyers such as myself are trying to advocate towards.
So interesting to hear you talk about empathizing with your client, which on the face of it seems like a pretty common sense or pretty straightforward kind of assumption. But it's interesting, like even in medicine, there's a certain sense of like, you know, having to have a bit of a professional relationship with your patients. Like, you know, there's a sense that you can't get so involved with the patients that you lose your objectivity, or you lose your ability to actually try to like objectively, whatever that means, objectively see the facts. And a lot of people have written kind of against that way of thinking. You know, the book that comes to my mind is In Shock by Ronak, where she talks about her own experience is becoming an ICU patient. But if anything, like I feel like in law, that would be an even harder position to take, or more radical view to take. You know, just like Dr. Ball, my younger brother is a lawyer too, and I've learned a lot about the sort of law from his eyes. What do you think about that idea of maintaining objectivity or not getting drawn into your clients' sort of battles or their personal struggles?
You know, I think there's a difference between getting involved in somebody's life and getting too close and, you know, too emotional. There's a difference between that and putting yourself in your client's place. By putting yourself in your client's place, you become objective, because so for example, I'll give you an example. Previously, when clients would come to me and they're like, hey, like I can't agree with this person, and, you know, I'm wasting time. What do I need to do? And I would just say, well, you know, just start a notice of family claim. It just gets the process started. You know, notice of family claim is a document you file in court, and you serve the spouse, and it forces them to respond within 30 days. So my intentions as a lawyer is just to say, hey, you want her to respond. We just need to file this claim and serve. But when I put myself in the place of that spouse, and imagine the night when I'm having dinner and somebody knocks on my door and serves me with divorce papers, you know, from somebody who I loved and, you know, perhaps I have a kid with, and I just see it on paper. What I think is not, oh, he's just trying to get me to, you know, respond. What I think is the love of my life is actually suing me, and he or she is taking me to court, and there's going to be like a custody war, you know, like that's the difference. The mind of a lawyer is, you know, how can I do to move this matter forward? But the mind of the client and the spouse is, I've just been violated and betrayed. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get the best lawyer and I'm going to respond. And I would have compromised, but I'm not going to compromise anymore if this is the way you're going to do it. So, you know, that's what I'm talking about when I say, when you separate yourself from emotions and people and the interest of the family as a unit, you are going to cause destruction. And I totally get your point. You know, like 150 years ago, you know, the biggest principle of the oath that we take as lawyers is that we're only going to act in the best interest of our clients, and we're gonna be overzealous, and we're gonna be fighting tooth and nail to get them the rights that they need. What I'm saying is that that concept applies to every type of law out there except for family law. Because for family law, if you do that, a family is coming apart, and you're pulling it even more and more apart. And you're putting two people, in a fighting ring, and you go round and round and round and round. And sometimes you put their children in there as the referee to pick a side, because you're a lawyer and you need to protect their interests. But, when you look at the basic element of human beings and how societies work, doing that is not going to go anywhere positive. So, I maintain my professionalism, sometimes, guilty as charged. Sometimes I do, relate to their pain, because it's hard to hear people in pain all day and not care about it. But what I try to do to stay objective is just to put myself in their place and ask myself, having seen what happens if there's a fight, what would I do in this situation? And that's the advice I give to my clients.
That's incredibly refreshing, and I agree with everything that you said, whether that's in law or as a physician. And if you ever want to change careers someday, I think you'd fit right in with medicine after all. So there you go.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about divorce, specifically in physicians. And, in sort of doing some background reading around this, I came across a study which actually showed that, contrary to maybe popular opinion or popular kind of social media type stuff, physicians apparently actually have lower rates of divorce than maybe the general population, or I think at least among other healthcare workers. What's been your experience? Obviously, the people coming to you are coming because they're in trouble, but sort of, in your practice, do physicians tend to be a big part of it? And where did we sort of rank in terms of other professions in terms of experiencing divorce?
I find that I do agree with that study. I think there's two reasons why we see physicians less and less, at least in the litigation realm. And that there's two reasons. One is that they're very smart. So like if you tell them, they do a cost benefit analysis of fighting versus settling. And because they're very smart and they tend to let their rational minds guide them instead of like the emotional side of it, they tend to settle a lot quicker. The other thing is that they're very busy. Family law litigation, or like the negotiations and the document disclosure, is a very, very time-consuming, all-encompassing task. And I find that a lot of physicians that I help simply don't have the time to invest in family law, litigation or conflict. So they tend to want to settle and resolve more than fight. When it comes to finances, they do tend to be, they earn quite a, good sum, and it's not like they're not gonna, they don't tend to penny pinch. They don't tend to want to, maximize the financial gain. They would much rather move on because they have a lot of other very, very important things in their hands, such as, saving lives, literally. If your job is to save lives, and, you're caught up, fighting over money, a lot of them, because they like to save lives, they try to focus on saving lives. And when it comes to children, that's the interesting part. I find, two different types of physicians. The ones that tend to be from a bit of an older generation where, one person is a physician and, the other person is a homemaker or, has a job which is not as demanding. So they tend to settle on parenting time by allowing the other parent who perhaps has stayed at home or has a less demanding job to be the primary caregiver of the child. And they work with that spouse to kind of maximize their time when they're not so busy. There's the other type, which is happening more and more nowadays, where you get two physicians who, married each other or, are even in the middle of medical school and separating. Those are more interesting to me because they're both of, equal education, equal careers. And when they have a child, they kind of like figuring out what to do in those situations can actually be a little bit more challenging, because you get two very strong-minded people who have just about the same amount to kind of offer to the child, or come from very like equal financial backgrounds. Those people I find easier to deal with. I find that because there are more on equal level playing fields, everything is just basically 50-50. And if they need help, they go to a third person, to help with the child or so forth. So, in the grand scheme of things, when I look at all the professions that I help, physicians actually are the easiest to deal with. To be honest, they're actually a pleasure to deal with. I just think that they have their priorities straight, and they're very intelligent, and they just look at the reality of their situation and they try to work towards that. The main problem arises when there's an inequality in power and balance, and one person demands more than they should, such as too much custody or parenting time, and wanting to disallow usually the physician from even like seeing the child, even on a part-time basis, because they say, I'm a better parent, you never had time, you were never a good father, therefore you're not deserving of spending enough time with the child. Those situations are quite heart-wrenching, because they're more difficult to resolve, because there's it's the interest of the one parent versus the interest of the child, and it's a bit more difficult to align them together.
This is a very niche question sort of to ask, but do you see differences in terms of both the numbers of physicians, like let's say surgeons versus medicine physicians who are in medicine? Do you see both in terms of numbers of people coming forward who are seeking a divorce and the way that it plays out?
I mean this with all due respect, but I think the surgeons are, their cases are a lot more problematic than, like general, like MDs. And there's various reasons for that. Like I would say the top two. One is because of what I would see as really inhuman hours of work, shifts where they have to like stay up, sometimes for like 36 hours in a row. They really can't give more than what they give to their job. So, even when it comes to dating, when it comes to relationship, when it comes to children, so they give so much of themselves to their career that when it comes to their family, it's not that they don't want to give more, there's just nothing left. So there's a lot of breakdown of relationships because of that, which I think, it's quite familiar, might be a familiar subject to you guys, having done it yourselves. And it's kind of heartbreaking, because I don't blame them for wanting to have families and children, but they have this job which is competing with, them being able to give to their family and children. So I see more surgeons divorcing than, general practitioners who can, manage their hours and their time and, can kind of like work together to take care of their family. And the second thing is surgeons tend to be a lot more set on their ways. They tend to be a bit more opinionated on what needs to happen and, what results need to be achieved, which creates a bit of inflexibility when it comes to negotiations and settlements. There's a very famous case, it's all over the media, Dr. Devathison. He's in Singapore, but his wife was here. And, it's like the case is basically like a big story, which is all over the media. And you can kind of like, if you read the judgment, you will see, he's a very extreme example, but he had this mindset of how things should be. And he did not stop fighting anybody until, he would have reached, what he wanted to reach. And during that process, he just created so much destruction. So I think, he's definitely an anomaly. He's a very extreme case. And, in my experience, at least in my cases, I've never, met a surgeon like him. But I have had cases with surgeons where the conflict is higher. Just one, because they can't, just like they couldn't give that much time to their family, they can't give that much time to their case. And that creates a lot of problems because there's no communication or, cooperation. And even when we do obtain the information, sometimes they tend to be more set in their ways and think that, the law should be this way when the law is different is saying differently. So that's the difference I've noticed personally with surgeons.
Oh, I think that's so well said, and your insight into the surgical brain is remarkable. There's no doubt you've just hit a lot of nails on the head, so to speak, with that. Your comments bring up an interesting point, and again, we don't know this intuitively, but it seems like the framework or the rules of the divorce or separation process vary a fair bit, obviously from person to person, but from province to province. And I was curious why that is, and what the mechanics of that become for a lot of our listeners who, as you know, are across the whole country.
It depends on, you mean the Canadian provinces?
Yeah, that's a great example. Yeah. Like, does it differ if you're in Alberta versus British Columbia, for example?
They were different, but they've become a bit more uniform lately. For example, in BC until 2013, which, there was this law, which I didn't agree with, and that said, if you come to a marriage with, let's say, $1 million, and you separate, 5 years later, that $1 million that you came into the marriage with gets divided half and half, which made no sense to me. It's okay if you divide what you accumulate during your relationship, but whatever you accumulated prior should not be divisible. So there was a difference in laws across the country, but lately I think all those laws have become uniformized to say that what you bring in is yours, and what you accumulate during the relationship gets split half and half. As far as child custody goes, again, that was something that was a bit different all over the country, because this is pretty technical, but some provinces would say that the best interest of the child is the only thing that you should consider in parenting time decisions. And some provinces were saying the best interest of the child is paramount. So those words carry different meanings, and now it's become best interest of the child is the only thing that the court should consider. So that's another uniformity. The main difference nowadays between provinces is really between Quebec and the rest of the country. And that's that Quebec doesn't acknowledge common law relationships, which seems quite strange to me. So in BC or Alberta or Toronto, if you've been living with somebody for, depends on, the length of time is different from province to province, but we're talking average 2 to 3 years. If you've lived with them, you become common law. And once you're common law, your rights are pretty much the same as a married couple. So aside from the actual divorce papers, spousal support, child support, and property divisions are all the same, regardless of whether you're married or common law. But Quebec doesn't acknowledge that. So if you've been common law even for 20 years, you may walk out of that relationship with no rights to spousal support and potentially property. So that's the main difference between Quebec and the rest of the country. But all the other provinces, as of today, tend to be quite uniformized. I don't see too many differences in their family laws.
Oh, that's fascinating, and it's very helpful to know. There's no question, as I mentioned, for all of our listeners. I'm curious, just to go back to one element you said in particular about the rights or the focus on the children. Mm-hmm. So what does that mean, say in a hypothetical context where one parent does most of the caregiving, most of the income generation, and the other parent is really not engaged, not interested, and maybe the child, say, I realize it's a pretty nuanced example, but maybe the child even has a disability, for example, or is autistic, and really all of the time, the social, the education, the financial comes from one person. Mm-hmm. And now all of a sudden, the other parent in this divorce is trying to achieve 50-50 or really move into a space that they haven't traditionally been. I realize that probably differs from case to case substantially, but how does that concept sort of meet with the standards across the country?
Great question. And, that's the center of, I would say, 90% of family law disputes, So what happens is when you're a family unit, you usually delegate tasks, I'm going to cook or I'm going to take care of the baby most of the time, and you go out and you work and you earn money. There are situations where one person earns the money and takes care of the child, or vice versa. again, like what it goes all back to is what is in the best interest of the child, right? So the argument has been made that, hey, I was the primary caregiver during our marriage, and now this person, now that we're separated, he or she is coming saying, I want 50-50. But what you need to look at is forget about who was a primary parent and who wasn't, and what they're fighting, what they're fighting against each other for. It's not about them. It's what's in the best interest of the child. So if after the relationship, one parent who was kind of absent from the child's relationship wants to be present, wants to be a good parent, wants to contribute, and if that benefits the child, then whatever happened in the past essentially doesn't matter. The judge or, decision maker or mediator, whoever, they look at, is this parent actually putting a good effort into making this child's life better by being a part of that child's life, so to make sure that the child is damaged as little as possible because of separation? And if the answer is yes, both parents should be involved as long as they're putting that effort, then what the history just simply doesn't matter. It will be considered in the grand scheme of things to see, like the ability of each parent. But the test for parenting time is not who's a better parent. It's whether you have two decent parents who are good in different ways. Mm-hmm. So that's, that tends to be the assumption that, if historically somebody's been the primary parent, they should continue to do so. But, as you can appreciate, when you live with somebody under the same roof, even if you're not seeing your child, maybe you come home in the evening before your child goes to bed and you see the child, like even for a couple hours, and that does good things to the child. But when you're separated and, somebody says, I've been the primary parent, and you only get to see the child, 2 hours a week, what does that do to the child, as far as the bonding experience and the love that needs to be transferred back and forth between, these three people? So that's a very
so interesting.
Subject. But, that's the short form answer.
I appreciate you, and that's really helpful. You've touched on it a couple of times, and I just thought, again, maybe for some of our listeners who aren't as facile, of course, as you are, in general, the mechanics of divorce, at least to my understanding, are the separation of property, spousal support going forward, and child support going forward. And I would think that the separation of property in general is pretty straightforward. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how child support is constructed, and then more importantly, I think the biggest area of gray would be spousal support.
Okay, so it's in some cases that have helped surgeons or doctors, the separation of property and spousal support tend to be quite complicated because it depends. So I know a lot of doctors or surgeons who function like they kind of provide services under a corporate entity. So because of that, at least when it comes to spousal support, it's not the income that they're claiming on their personal, T1 general tax returns. The income under their corporate name can become fully available for the purposes of spousal and child support. So if you made, hypothetically, you made $1 million a year and you only took out $100,000 for your own personal income, when it comes to your support payments, it's not the $100,000 that's going to be considered. It's going to be potentially the $1 million that has to be considered. So, and if you don't want the $1 million a year to be considered, you need to come up with an argument why some or, the majority of that money is needed to stay in the corporation. And some of the reasons is, I want to start a clinic. I need the money to, invest in purchasing a clinic or hiring doctors, or I need some money to stay there in case I get sued in the future. And that's why, my income shouldn't be $1 million. It should be $100,000 or $200,000 or $300,000. So it does become complicated when it comes to spousal support, because spousal and child support are purely based on incomes. And the question is, what is your income? Is it your full corporate income, or is it, is it something other than that? Spousal support also is a big problem for a lot of doctors and surgeons who marry, I've had cases where two people were like high school sweethearts, and one of them became a nurse and the other one became a doctor, right? Or a surgeon. And by the time they separate, one person makes $50,000 a year. The other one can make, $600,000 a year. What that means is that the higher earner is going to have to pay sometimes tens of thousands of dollars just in spousal support per year to the lower earner. And that seems very unfair because, they would say my ex-spouse doesn't need 30 grand a month to live on. Yes, I did make a lot of money, but we saved a lot of it. We bought properties, or I kept the money in my company. And now I have to treat this as if every time I get, $50,000 a month, 25,000 of that has to just go to my ex, which, what does she want to do with $25,000? That's been a big contentious thing. Like, a lot of cases have tried to cap incomes or reduce them or whatnot. But it's just a very complicated area of law, which can be quite contentious. And for that reason, I think the best thing anybody can do with their lives if they want to get married is to have a prenuptial agreement, which hopefully we'll get to in a second. As far as property goes, that's also quite complicated because a lot of surgeons or doctors, like I said, they have companies and corporations that can hold real estate properties or businesses. And at the time of divorce, you have to value those. You have to determine, how much of that value was brought into the marriage and how much was accumulated. You need chartered accountants and appraisers. It makes me tired even talking about it, which again, I tell you, it's just best to address those through the prenuptial agreement, so you never have to go there.
That's such wise advice, and of course, it's like a patient for us, right? You might have the same diagnosis, but every scenario and every situation can be so different. It's remarkable. Yes. I'm curious if you could describe to us the children's support, in particular, and how that works, based on the grid, and then maybe even more importantly, the extrapolation beyond that for your examples of someone's making, 50 and then 600 or 100 and $1 million or however that works.
Yeah, so child support is a bit more uniform. So, sometime, if I don't know, long time ago, I think it was 1976 or no, maybe more recent. But in any event, the government came up with something called the child support guidelines, which are federal. So, they're set by the federal government, and it's they're very straightforward. You plug in incomes and a number generates. In a situation where I'm going to say, let's say my client is a surgeon or a doctor, and his or her spouse has the children in his or her care more than 60% of the time. If that person has the children more than 60% of the time, that person's income doesn't matter. They could be making 2 million or zero, doesn't matter. The only income that is considered is the income of the person who has the children less than 40% of the time. So what happens is the guidelines say up to $150,000, you use this formula. You literally, put in the income up to $150,000. You decide you click how many children and the province, and you can just go online. It generates a number, which is the child support you need to pay. For incomes more than $150,000, the amount of child support becomes the discretion of the judge or the decision maker, or by agreement. What that means is that the decision maker is going to have some liberty to decide what that amount should be. But the scary part of this, in a sense, is that more and more recently, judges don't apply the discretion. They just take the entire amount of income, they plug it into the same federal child support guidelines, and it basically generates a number. Generates just a generic number, given the amount of income, and that becomes the number that you have to pay. So judges don't reduce that number, which I think in some situations they should do more often, because sometimes, for example, if you're making $1 million and you have 2 children and you have to work and you can't have the children more than 40% of the time, you find yourself in a situation where you're paying 15, 20 grand tax-free per month for the support of children who may have very minimal expenses, like an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old, you can take them to all the horseback riding lessons you want, but to for those children to have $20,000 per month in expenses seems quite high. So there's been a lot of litigation over this. Sometimes some judges apply what's called the cap to income. So they cap the income at 150 or sometimes $1 million, or sometimes not at all, to determine child support. And it's the general principle behind it is that the parent who is a higher earner can provide a very high standard of living to the children when the children are in his or her care, and those children deserve to have the same standard at the other parents' home. Therefore, that's, they're going to have to pay a high amount of child support.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. And, we certainly see those exact examples around us. Unfortunately, all the time, it seems like it's really hard to make $1 million. Not hard, let me rephrase that. It can be quite damaging to make $1 million compared to 150, as you point out, if you're on that same extrapolated matrix. It's an interesting philosophical discussion for sure.
Yeah.
I'm curious if we could move on to maybe something else, maybe equally interesting and soft. And really, you touched on it a little bit. One of the things you hear physicians say, right or wrongly, is, I studied my whole life. My training pathway was, say, 18 years if you've done a couple of surgical fellowships. Mm-hmm. The other person was maybe working, maybe not, and doing other stuff with or without children. Mm-hmm. Why should it be philosophically that essentially that other person is able to reap half of the financial benefits from that relationship? And, mm-hmm. and I think in particular, it highlights a number of potential areas, but it re-emphasizes how important, obviously this is true, but mm-hmm. how important, picking or merging with the right spouse is, and the decision to have children. These are two, really, really, really life critical decisions up front, mm-hmm. that I think a lot of us tend to be romantic about and maybe not put the thought into it that we should.
Yes. The bit of a good news. I know I've talked about a lot of bad news for your audience potentially, but the law is not that stringent. Like, it's not a one size fit all. So let's say, again, I'm using the example of, we were high school sweethearts. We got together and, one person stayed at home to take care of the children while I was able to use that time to go to, university and do my residency and fellowships and whatnot. Mm-hmm. Like, this person allowed me to get to where I am today. And now 20 years later, this person doesn't have the education that she or he could have gotten if she didn't have to care for the children, and doesn't have the career prospects or advances that I was able to have. So in a very traditional situation like that, when there's children involved and one person was clearly educationally and career-wise disadvantaged because of marriage and having to raise children, mm-hmm. then it seems more fair for the income to, be potentially split. Because as you may appreciate, like, raising children is a very difficult job. It's definitely the most difficult job I've had to do. Even
absolutely.
Harder than being a lawyer, you get no break whatsoever. But in a situation though, like, we have situations where, two physicians, for example, met each other at, after med school, or even at med school, and, they studied together and they didn't have kids. And 7 years later, like, one of them, like, they separated, and one of them doesn't work right now and the other one makes a lot of money. In that situation, like, no judge is going to come and, like, split the income of the higher earner in half, like, in other words, the first question is, was there a disadvantage arising from the marriage itself? So if neither party experienced a disadvantage, they could do it, their education, they could work, and they both have the kind of, like, more or less the same ability to earn an income, then no spousal support is payable. That's the first question is, was there disadvantage? If the answer is yes, then you go to determine how much spousal support is going to be. And there's, like, different ranges of spousal support. There's different time frames depending on, the length of the marriage. In a marriage where it was only 5 years and there were no kids, even if there's a big income disparity, spousal support may only be ordered for, 1 or 2 years, but in a situation when it's a 25-year marriage, they're in their 60s and they've had kids, and one person just is not going to be able to go out there and become, very, financially secure, then spousal support is definitely going to be longer and, higher.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Makes sense. I guess the next thing to talk about, as we move towards the end here, and is the idea to go back to the prenup. Mm-hmm. Give us a sense, because I think we all carry completely erroneous views of that concept. And you'll hear people say, well, they mean nothing. And other people say, well, they mean everything. Mm-hmm. I think as physicians, we really have zero sense, in terms of the reality of that.
Yeah. So prenups are extremely awkward. They're very uncomfortable. They go against love in a sense, because here you are planning the rest of your life with somebody, and then you're forced to, imagine a situation when it's not working out, and how much money is somebody gonna get if things don't work out, right? So I get that it's awkward and it's uncomfortable, and a lot of people simply avoid it. But if there's one thing I want to say is this, that in the decade that I've been practicing family law, possibly the biggest reason for people breaking up is purely financial reasons. And that can take the form of, I wanted to buy a house, but he wanted to have a business, or she spends too much money on her purses, or she takes too many trips, or, he drinks too much, he gambles too much. Financial issues during a relationship cause breakups, to me, more than affairs do or betrayals do. So the one thing that people don't talk about that a prenup does is it forces you to agree on finances at separation. So it kind of, when people say, if a relationship is going to work if you go traveling together or if you live together, I would add that you will know if a relationship is going to work if you agree on finances, how to divide them and how to spend money. And a good exercise of that is to get into a prenup or discuss a prenup, because even that discussion will tell you if this is the right person to marry, because a lot of times when you're engaged or you're dating or something, these financial things such as buying a house or spending money on children don't even come about until later during the marriage when they come and they can become quite problematic. So it's an exercise of testing the strength of your relationship. And the second thing is that I want to say is when people separate, it's so devastating. It's so emotional. It's so mind-numbing that the last thing you want to do is to find yourself in a lawyer's office or try to figure out finances if you don't have to. When you separate, the only thing you want to focus on is to mend your broken heart and what to do with respect to your children. So in order to reduce your own stress, in order to create clarity for, if something like that happens, it's to the interest of both people to discuss things when things are calm and loving, and to come to some sort of a conclusion so that you can put that aspect of things to rest and not think about them ever, hopefully. But when you separate, you at least have this peace of mind that, I can deal with my pain and my children, but I don't have to deal with the finances. If you frame this issue that way with your spouse, they will see where you're coming from. The problem, the mistake is when somebody goes and says, well, I made all this money, I want to protect my money, I want to make sure that you're not after my money, and we're marrying for the right reasons, and I'm going to get a prenup to make sure you don't get a penny out of everything when we divorce. Obviously the response to that is going to be very negative, with one person saying, why do you think I want you for money, and why do you think I'm not worth anything? It just creates problems. So the discussion of a prenup needs to be based on what's in our both best interest and why this prenup is going to help both of us. And, one of the biggest misconceptions is that prenups are made in such way that one person that makes all the money keeps everything at the end, and the other person walks out with nothing. That's in 99% of the cases, just simply not the case. People can say, when we separate, we'll split 50-50, all these assets, and we'll keep all these other assets separate. And, I'll agree to, let's say 5 years of spousal support, or, based on a cap of X amount, right? So you just come to your own agreements, because and you figure out what's fair if you separate, and you put that on paper, and then you put that to the side and go on, to the sunset, with your love life. The biggest problem with not having prenups is when people separate, they each go to their own lawyers, and because the law is just, there's, like you said, there's so many different situations where a judge has so much discretion to do 50-50, 60-40, include these assets, include this income and that income. So each lawyer tells the person, this is what I could get you. And now there's a distancing of positions, and then, litigation and conflict can arise. If you can't just agree on how to separate assets and, what you're going to get, even if it's a 50-50, you're reducing your conflict by over 99%. And in that process, you don't have to spend your life savings on lawyers fighting over disagreements. This is another very important thing that I'm going to finish with. Please don't think of getting into a prenup to basically save 100% of everything, because prenups can be invalidated or canceled later if it turns out that they're significantly unfair. AKA, at the time of separation, the prenup says the surgeon is going to walk away with 10 million, and the other the partner who raised the children is going to walk away with 0. You want to get into a prenup which has some aspect of fairness to it, maybe not 50-50 or even 40-60, but leave something to the other person so that it's immune from being challenged in the future.
I wanted to finish with 2 questions, maybe the first a little bit negative and the other hopefully very positive. The more negative side of things is, in an era where we're trying to deal with intimidation and bullying and that whole sort of negative side of things, what are the rights of an individual? And let's just create a scenario: a female physician who's, in the midst of divorce, and the male is bullying her, or flip it around, the female divorcee is quote unquote harassing. And I know that word has this very special legal and political definition, but harassing the other spouse at their place of work, like in the hospital. What are the rights, and how would you recommend that those types of scenarios move forward or be improved?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And a few years ago, we actually, as a province, changed our legislation to recognize a concept which we call family violence. And family violence has been interpreted as not just like physical violence, as psychological abuse or mistreatment, as financial abuse or mistreatment, aka somebody making a lot of money and not paying, support for their children, has been defined as family violence. It's really what it is somebody taking advantage of their position of power to bully or put somebody else under duress. And if family violence is found in a case, people can lose custody of their children. They may have to pay a lot of money, and they may be subject to various orders which would have a criminal aspect to them. So unfortunately, given COVID, it's a prime example when, somebody who's abused at home is now stuck at home, because what are you going to do? Go to like shelters that are closed, or when you have no power and no money, you stay at home and you get abused more and more. In those situations, the law has allowed us as family lawyers to use numerous measures to make sure family violence doesn't happen. The most extreme of it is being allowed to go to court without the knowledge of the, quote unquote abuser, and get a court order in their absence, forcing them to stay away, at least, you can even say 30 kilometers from the person who's abused or the children. And if they come close, they can be arrested by the police. So that's like the most extreme. Most cases don't fall in that extreme case where, there's so much abuse that you have to get restraining orders, but there are other mechanisms such as conduct orders, which would relate to situations that you've explained, where a judge in your absence or presence would make a ruling that you're not allowed to go to the person's, place of employment. You can't disparage the person. You can't talk negatively about the person with your children or anybody else for that matter. And if you do, you're going to be in contempt of a court order, which can carry very, very extreme consequences, such as, the least of which would be fines, and the most extreme of which would be being put in prison. So, I'm so grateful that we live in a country that more and more every day is acknowledging family violence, which is absolutely rampant in families more than anywhere else. And it's even being defined by I just read a case lately that it was actually about a doctor and actually two doctors. This is really interesting. So one of them was like from a South Asian community where the woman became a doctor and she was very ambitious and she just wanted to go out and work. And her husband was actually a dentist. And he wrote her a letter at the time that they were separating. And he basically said, I can't take this anymore. Your role is to stay at home, make my dinner because, I work so much and take care of our child. And if you can't agree with that, then I have to separate. Obviously, they separated. But the judge found family violence in that by saying that, you are basically like taking a woman who's trying to just, have a job which would be at your level. And you're basically, forcing her or putting her under duress that if you don't do X, Y, and Z, I'm going to leave you. And I'm basically going to fight you over everything. So again, we have numerous mechanisms to address family violence through courts, through lawyers, and through mediators, which would definitely protect those who are vulnerable.
Wow, that's a scary and disappointing case vignette. There's no doubt. The last thing, which again, hopefully we end on a positive note here today, and again appreciate your time so very much. Yes. Is really a very simple question. How do you pick a good family lawyer that works well for you and with you? And I the caveat to that, or the comment to that, would be, as you pointed out, when the divorce process happens, it's almost surreal. It's almost like you're dreaming. And it's very hard, I think, for a lot of us to mechanize finding a lawyer. You start to ask your friends that have been divorced, or your colleagues, who did you have? And that's usually the way it goes. But what are some of the things that should be red flags, maybe for that selection, or how do we find folks? And of course, in Vancouver, it's you. This is very clear. But what about just in general as a principle or philosophy for all of our listeners?
I'll give you a short answer and a tip, which I actually thought about this morning in the car. How do you find the best family lawyer? Because Google will only tell you so much. And when you've never been inside a courtroom or haven't gone through a divorce, like how do you do it? And a really good idea came to my mind, which I'm very excited to share. What I would say is, in the short format, find the best mediator, family law mediator in town, which is very easy to find. You can go online to look at, the best mediator, or you can go on Mediate BC roster, and it shows all the prominent mediator. Go to that mediator and ask them if they would give them a synopsis of your file, and ask them to refer you to a good family lawyer. This is what it does. A prominent family law mediator has been a senior family lawyer, number one. Number two, they've dealt with hundreds of family lawyers who come before them to mediate a case. So they get to know family lawyers, they know the approach, and they know the quality of the lawyer's work. Take that referral and ask for maybe 2 or 3 names. And then, because, at least with physicians and surgeons, they do enjoy a bit of a financial liberty to be able to test the waters. Ask for 2 or 3 referrals, and then go and meet with those lawyers and interview them and see, beyond anything else, who you connect with better. Don't pay attention to, when they say these are the results I'm going to get you, because no lawyer can get you results. The judge gets you results, or you get your results when you agree with something. So don't worry about what they say they can get you. only focus on, am I connecting with this lawyer? Are they understanding who I am? Are they empathizing with my situation? And most importantly, are they giving me constructive suggestions instead of destructive suggestions? Constructive suggestions would include, you know what, like, let's have a 4-way meeting. Let's do some mediation. Let me call the other lawyer and just have a chit chat with them. Here's a path or like a way to resolve your case. These are the steps involved. Like, that lawyer will kind of put some peace of mind, and, definitely ask for their fees as well. So you're not, shocked when the first bill arrives. What you need to avoid is, I hate to say it because we have really good Google ratings ourselves, but don't go based on Google ratings. Don't think that whatever firm gets the best Google ratings is, going to be the best lawyer for you. Don't look for an aggressive lawyer. Don't go on Google and put aggressive lawyer, because as much as I understand, when you're in a conflict, you want the best protection. An aggressive lawyer is only going to destroy things. You want an assertive lawyer, and I have a blog on that. And don't ask your family and friends for the best lawyer. Just please don't do that. It's almost like going to an architect and asking who's the best surgeon in town. Like, I wouldn't do that personally. I would go to a surgeon to ask, I would maybe I'd go to a heart surgeon to ask for, who the best brain surgeon is, which is, my that even is not totally accurate, but it's at least better than going to a family friend who has no idea anything about medicine. That's kind of like the similarity I said, go to a family law mediator instead of going to your family and friends, because that mediator has been a lawyer and knows lawyers. It's the same as, the heart surgeon at least has worked, hopefully, in the hospital where the brain surgeon has worked and has witnessed their, quality of work. So don't ask for legal advice from family and friends. Don't think that your case is going to be similar to your family and friends who went through a divorce, and kind of only focus on your connection with your lawyer and the questions you have for your lawyer. And at any time during the process, between you and your lawyer, if you are unsure about something, if you have questions, if you feel like, things are getting shaky, or, what the lawyer is doing may not be what you want to do, always go and just set up an hour consultation with another lawyer and ask for a second opinion. That tends to provide a lot of assurance and, a bit of a critique of your lawyer's work. And either, the second lawyer is going to tell you they're doing the right job, or they're going to say these are the things we would do differently. And whatever kind of like sounds better for you is the path that you need to follow.
You've been listening to Cold Steel, the official podcast of the Canadian Journal of Surgery. If you've liked what you've been listening to, please leave us a review on iTunes. We'd love to hear your comments and feedback, so feel free to email us at podcast.cjs@gmail.com or connect with us on Twitter @CanJSurge. Thanks again.